So again, we're going to talk about aftercare. Spring is the best time to collect any trees, and we're going to collect primarily when the buds of the trees are swelling. That is the best time. So one of the things you're going to hear me not say is collect them by this day or this date or by March 15th or whatever, because the trees should be determined when you do everything you're going to do. Now, certain dates may sometimes coincide, but depending on the weather, it's always going to be bud swell is going to be your determination. One of the things I always share with people, if you have crocus or daffodils, that's usually a good sign that a lot of your trees are probably starting, and maybe one or two might have started earlier, but that's when you want to start looking.
Like when they go into bloom.
Cindy, I'm going to post you or
okay.
mute you.
I won't ask anymore.
Okay.
Good.
You can collect in the fall in September, October. I'm not going to go into that because I don't know that much about it. It's probably harder. Nursery industry obviously digs a whole lot of stuff around that time to sell, but they also have all of the techniques and strategies to do that. And also, I'm not going to talk about Yamadori, the people go out in the mountains and collect that are in rock pockets that basically have fairly intact root systems. So again, this is field trees, landscape, shrubs, stuff you dig out around here. So we're going to talk a little bit about bud swell. This is a Japanese black pine, a picture of one that is not swelling or swollen. You can tell that it's not because it's entirely brown and there is no green beginning to show. On this bud, you can see the green, the buds are just starting to begin to open and you can begin to see green. So if you want to know what is bud swell on a pine, that's what you would be looking for. And this would be the appropriate time when you see that to dig a Japanese black pine or any pine for that matter. This would be a crab apple. And a lot of other deciduous trees look like this. The buds are beginning to swell. And this is the absolute best time to begin to dig them or repot them. And even if they open up a little bit, as long as they don't completely open, you're still in the window to do that. Once they open, you're probably not in a good place to do that. This is an elm bud, which again is you can begin to see the little green beginning to swell. So those are your indications. Those are the absolute best time. Now, if you have greenhouse and you can keep them warm from freezing, you could probably dig them earlier, but we're just assuming you don't. This is a blue spruce or a spruce, and you can see on the top right hand, the buds were just beginning to open. That brown sheath is on top, and you can see the little green bundles starting. That's the best time. Again, any elongating species. So I wanted to give you guys some idea of what bud swell looks like. So when you're out looking at trees or whatever, if they're beyond swell and they're opening up, wait, don't dig them. The other thing you're going to hear me say a lot, and this is true in bonsai, is be patient. One of the things Dave and I were talking a lot about how many trees we killed because we did wrong techniques at the wrong time, mostly out of ignorance, but sometimes out of impatience. So one of the things I want to talk about is if you're going to dig a tree out of the field or out of your landscape or whatever, sometimes don't dig it out immediately. If you have time, it's wise to do major cuts and major pruning in the spring on something you want to dig. And then you would leave it for a year, untouched, the roots untouched, so that tree can use the massive amounts of energy that it had saved up from the winter to produce new growth that's going to produce, relatively decent branches, relatively good thickness. It may even begin to heal the wounds because the tree will never be as strong again. So if you have more than a year to wait, I would definitely recommend root pruning or top pruning and cutting it back to the way you want it before you actually dig it the next year. Here's an example of a yew that somebody has basically done pretty much stumped back, and you can see all the new growth that's beginning to occur. And it would be a whole lot easier to dig this up than it would have been to dig something up that was maybe 7 feet tall or whatever, and then working it. So if you have time, cut it back hard, let it regrow, and then dig it the next spring. This would be an example of something, if you had bottom growth on this, this would be a wonderful example where you could go in and cut all of the big branches off the top of that, leave it sit, let it regrow for the year, and then try to dig it up in the spring. So again, I'm trying to give you guys examples. I'm not just going to tell you, I want you to see what they're going to look like when you would want to do them. Now, the other thing is, let me shrink my little window here. There we go. You may want to, if you've done that and you cut back the tree hard, you may want to fertilize and water close to the trunk of the tree to encourage adventitious roots. Oftentimes trees don't have sometimes roots in or tight to the trunk because it's dry, because the canopy functions as an umbrella and not a lot of roots are growing there. But if you've cut back the tree, the canopy is no longer there. And then if you can water that area, fertilize it, you may very well encourage adventitious roots to grow, and therefore when you attempt to dig it out the next spring, you're going to have a much greater success rate and have a lot better root system. You also, if you've, like I said, if you've cut it back in the spring and you've waited a whole year, you're going to have tighter, more usable branches and growth than you will otherwise. So again, cut it back, wait, fertilize it, water it, and then next spring dig it. We're going to talk, I'm jumping back here a second. We're going to now talk about what you do if you are going to dig your tree. And one of the things you see on the left-hand side where I say stabilize the patient, literally, figuratively, you want to keep, once you've got your treasure out of the ground, you want to keep that root ball and roots stable. The biggest thing that can kill trees is not just the dig, but it's the poor control of the roots and root ball after it has been removed from the ground. I've seen people throw them in the back of the truck or whatever, and roots do not like to be moved. Okay, the other thing is if you're going to go out and dig a tree like that big yew you saw, be prepared to spend a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of cussing. It can be incredibly difficult. The first one you want to do, I would probably recommend something small. I didn't follow that rule. I dug some really huge things, and it can take hours, and then sometimes you still can't get them. But start out small and have the tools and have the energy and the time to be able to spend if you're going to tackle something big. For a large tree, one of the things that's critical in getting that tree, again, is to not disturb the root ball. So one of the things, and I'll show slides here in a minute, you're going to dig a trench around the root ball. And the reason you dig a trench around the root ball is you don't want to disturb the roots attached to the base. After you dig the trench around the root ball, obviously the bottom of the root ball is still connected, and you're going to have to sever the roots that are under the root ball. And again, trying not to disturb it. So some of the things that you're going to need if you're going to go out doing this is a pretty powerful, strong, sharp, square edge shovel, because that shovel has to be sturdy. We're not talking about the ones that you shovel dirt with and, into piles. We're talking about square edge shovel that are going to be able to be sturdy enough to dig and cut through roots. You're also going to want to think about a heavy duty pair of loppers to cut roots, and maybe even an axe to do that, again, if you're going after something large. The other thing to think about is having a corded reciprocating saw. You could try one with batteries, but I doubt very much that they're going to be very powerful and the battery lasts long enough to be very useful. So obviously you're not going to be, if you're going to do something around the house and you can plug in a corded reciprocating saw, that can help immensely. And you're going to have a bunch of extra cut rough blades, the ones that are rough cut blades, because you'll dull those blades pretty quickly, because you're going to be cutting through the dirt, through the roots. But it's a whole lot easier than trying to put a shovel through them, even a good square edge sharp shovel. Here's a picture of the type of trench that you would dig. That looks like somebody could be planting a root ball, but that you would want to dig a trench around it and be able to get your shovel and slide it under to sever the roots that are going straight down from the tree so that you can remove it. So that's a picture of what you would want to be thinking about digging. And again, that's not a small task to dig a trench around a decent sized tree. There's another example of someone who's digging out a tree. And you can see the axe, the loppers. I don't know if you've got something else there. I would imagine you might even have a saw.
Figure out some shit to post.
But anyway, it's a ton of work. It is a ton of work to do that. This is again the side view of what a trench would look like when you were done. This is actually, they're talking about planting a tree, but this is what you want to dig out when you're removing a tree. So anyways, that's visually what you're trying to accomplish. If you have smaller material, you may be able to sever the roots and not disturb the roots with a sharp shovel or saw blade without having to dig a trench. And so that's a whole lot easier. But what happens is when you put your shovel in and push or bend, especially push in towards the root ball, that tends to start compacting and then loosening the dirt, which will fall off. So you still might have to dig a trench around that. And that's where a saw blade can be very helpful, that it cuts around and can help you remove it pretty easily. Again, it still can be a lot of work because you may be replacing multiple saw blades as you're wearing them out. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about broadleaf trees and deciduous conifers. Broadleaf trees are trees that drop their leaves for the winter. Deciduous conifers are trees that drop their needles in the winter. A deciduous conifer would be a bald cypress, would be a larch, and it would be a dawn redwood. So these are trees that can be handled differently than conifers that don't drop their needles. And so one of the things with broadleaf trees and deciduous conifers, if you're going to be digging one up, you can remove lots of branches
Tomorrow.
at the same
Okay.
time they are
Still
dormant.
got 2-hour delay.
Okay, who's got
2-hour
their,
delay.
hang on, we're gonna have to talk, turn off your microphone if you're talking in the background, please. So you can remove a lot of branches on a deciduous broadleaf or conifer since they're dormant, and they're gonna push a lot of buds off the trunk and the remaining branches. You can also remove garden soil carefully that has no roots. So if you have garden soil that there's no roots attached to it, you can take that off. But you want to keep any pockets of root with soil on the tree. If you don't know, you're probably best just to keep it on because you don't know. And that gets back, you saw the people burlapped and balled those up. They didn't really know. That's probably the safest and surest way to do that. For non-deciduous conifers, so that's pines, that's spruces, that's junipers, basically any evergreen other than maybe boxwoods and azaleas. Don't remove the foliage. You want to keep as much foliage as possible because if foliage is what fuels the root growth next year. And if you remove all of the top growth off of conifer, you basically killed the tree, even if you didn't dig it up. If you cut all the pine branches off, spruce branches off, juniper branches off, that tree ain't coming back even if you don't root prune it. So you don't want to just leave a little. On those, you want to leave as much as possible. As much foliage as possible will help the root system regenerate itself. Also on these, when you dig them, you do not remove or disturb native soil and the root ball. You want to keep everything is intact. So if one of them is a little more fragile than the other, the conifers are more fragile than the deciduous or deciduous conifers. All right, think of this as a critical care unit. You just completed major surgery on the vascular system that supplies water and nutrients to the tree. It is actually critical to its functioning. And trees die very quickly when it cannot transport water because it has a few feeder roots. So when you cut the roots off of a tree, most of the roots that you're cutting are merely the branches, if you will, conducting the resources through the roots up through there. So they're not, if you will, sustaining the tree. It's the root tips that are what's critical to keeping a tree alive. And when you sever roots close to a tree, you've severed a whole lot of its feeder roots that have been extended beyond where you've cut. And hopefully there's enough in there to sustain the tree until it comes back. Now, giving the tree lots of water, which I used to do, doesn't solve the problem. So it only has a few roots, so I'll just give it tons and tons of water. The bottom line, what you end up doing is drowning the tree. There aren't that many capillary roots, so they can only absorb so much water. It would be like sticking a fire hose down your throat when you were thirsty. It just is too much and it would kill you. So basically, putting lots and lots of water on these trees isn't the solution. And we're going to talk about the solution because it only can absorb so much water. Stabilize the patient. Keep the root ball intact and immobile. As I said earlier, and I'll say this a couple other times, take care of that root ball like your tree depends on it, because it does. So the less it moves in terms of being bumped or dropped or wiggled or whatever, that doesn't mean you can't pick it up like on a stretcher and walk with it or hold it in your arms. And as long as, again, you set it down gently or whatever, you're good. But bottom line is you do not want that root ball getting jostled and moved around. Burlap and twine, you tie it up tightly. If you're not exactly sure how to do that, you can go to a nursery and look at how they do it. It takes a little bit of a talent to do that, but get them nice and tightly connected so that the dirt isn't falling off. Also, if you're going out and you're getting a decent sized tree, have a friend or two who can help you carry it. You can create a stretcher. You can use a dolly. I think I just saw somebody talk about, I'm not a hunter, but I guess there's a thing that when you're hunting deer, you can pull it on and sort of drag it behind you or whatever, something like that. So something along those lines would help you carry something that's going to be immensely heavy. And I don't know how many of you dig lots of dirt, but a shovelful or two of dirt is incredibly heavy, and packed dirt around a root ball is amazingly heavy. Okay. Trees can tolerate 15 hours without moistening the roots. So if you bare rooted a tree, hypothetically, it could last 15 hours without rehydrating it. I wouldn't recommend that. So I guess the point behind saying this is you do not have to be in an immense hurry to moisten the roots. You don't have to soak the root ball after you cut it or whatever. If you have a mister, if you spray mist the roots that are exposed on the outside of the ball, you're going to be fine. And covering it with plastic or burlap or something that's going to keep desiccation down would also be helpful. The other thing to think about, a lot of people, put it in their pickup truck and drive home 50, 70 miles an hour. Well, that's 50 or 70 miles an hour wind, which is going to desiccate the tree. So be cautious about the speeds with which you're going to be driving if this tree is going to be in the back of a vehicle. Traveling 50 or however fast. Take your time. There's an example, I guess, I don't know, I assume that tree's doing just fine, or trees are doing fine, but they're moving those on a truck. So think big. Sole focus, keep the patient alive by restoring the vascular root system. So the only thing we care about, the absolute only thing we care about are the roots. What's going up above? You're not doing anything much to the top. There may be one or two things, but bottom line is all you care about are the roots, because that's what you just severely damaged. So we're in the intensive care unit. We got a compromised tree. Just like people, when we're compromised, we're vulnerable to pests, we're vulnerable to disease, we're vulnerable to severe weather, environmental conditions. So, we want to take as best care of this tree to ensure survival. And the longer it takes to recover, the more likely it's going to get sick or pests or whatever. So our goal is to get this as healthy as quickly, and the goal is to get the roots as healthy as quickly. So again, one of the things we're going to do is we want to regenerate roots. So obviously we want to keep as many capillary roots as possible, and those are the white feeder roots that are absorbing the nutrients and water. And as many as those that you can get on a tree, the better. That's why the first year, cutting it back hard and having all that benefit of the root growth might make the tree also a little lighter when you dig it. Now you don't have to carry a whole big top otherwise. Now on some deciduous trees, you still could cut the top and the bottom, but that will also help regenerate roots, all that new growth. Don't accidentally destroy any existing or new roots. And you want to regenerate as many roots as possible, because that's the sole goal of recovery after collection. Take a deep breath and relax. Roots need oxygen. I'm going to put this in a couple of times, because I always think, God, I think my tree needs to be watered. I think my tree needs to be watered. You almost never hear people say, gosh, I think my tree needs some oxygen. And so often we kill trees by watering them too much. And the reason the water kills them is we're not giving them enough oxygen. So I think it helps for me to think about my trees. how much oxygen are they getting rather than how well I'm watering them. In other words, how am I doing both? And I think that it applies in the collection of field grown material as well as your bonsai. So a healthy balance of water and oxygen with a focus, we're going to focus on the oxygen, especially when you're collecting trees and you're looking for them to recover. So you want a balance of water and oxygen in the root system. If there is not a balance of oxygen and water, if there's too much water, it becomes anaerobic, which means the bacteria in the system are not the bacteria you want, and they are not going to help the tree to get healthy, and they also allow the tree then to be vulnerable to disease and pest, and the tree declines. Same time, if we give them too much oxygen, that means we dried them out and they die. And the thing with, they're going to die pretty quickly without too much oxygen, because the leaves, one of the things you'll notice, if you begin to see the leaves begin to wilt when they were fine and turgid, and they start to wilt at the end, you know they got a little too much oxygen and need water at that time. So garden soil, and just giving you some information, an ideal contains 25% air, 25% water, 45% mineral material, 5% organic matter. Now this isn't a bonsai pot, this is just in nature. And each of these components is critical to the health of your tree and promotes growth and things like that. And obviously, it's just a reminder that we want to be thinking about keeping that balance of air and water in our soils in the bonsai pot, especially because they're so shallow. We're going to talk about that later. New roots are fragile. Any time new roots are growing, they can break very easily. They're incredibly delicate. And also roots will not grow into moving soil. They just don't do it. So keeping that root ball as stable and the tree as stable as possible the entire time from you dig it until it recovers is going to help a lot in your success rates. Capillary roots and fungus and mycorrhizal relationship. So we're going to talk about the capillary roots. This is a thing, I think Doug posted this picture. Basically, this is not the entire root system of that pine, but one of the things, especially with conifers, the roots form a symbiotic relationship with fungus in the soil, and mycorrhizal is the relationship between the roots and the fungus. It isn't an actual fungus. And what happens is the tree roots secrete exudates, which are sugars and starches that attract the fungi, that they come and feed on it. And as they feed on it, those fungi grow. And the fungi also absorb nutrients and water from the soil that they transfer to the tree. So they form a symbiotic relationship in the system. And especially with conifers, we want to think about having a symbiotic relationship. And one of the things is we'll talk about the mulching system. That probably is one of the things that is helpful in those systems.